Greetings, everybody. Learning is a hobby here. I want to go over chapter one in the Logic book by Bergman, Moore, and Nelson in this video. I've mentioned this before, but this is the book that I used when I was a undergraduate college student, to learn logic from. We actually went through this whole book, but that was at this point has been over 20 years ago. So I don't remember a whole lot from this. I mean, I remember the logic stuff, but I don't remember so much about the textbook. But going through chapter one has reminded me again why my college chose this as their book for the logic sequence, because it is a fantastically written book, and I'm actually excited to go through this one again. The other books that I've chosen to go through for introductory logic are fantastic in their own ways as well. But I'm particularly, enjoying seeing this through the lens of 20 years of studying mathematics and so on. And just appreciating it more than I think I was able to appreciate it as an undergraduate. So this is the fourth edition. You can get, later editions than this. This is by this point, a pretty old edition, but I don't think you really have to buy the newest edition as which is usual for math and science textbooks and so on. Um, so you can pick yourself up a used copy for a decent price and you'll be fine. If you want to follow on exactly with, my videos here, then you'll need to find a copy of the fourth edition. But like I said, usually books like this, once they've gone through a bunch of editions, really there's not much that changes from edition to edition. So get one that's, I don't think you have to worry too much about getting which edition, as long as you get one that's affordable. So anyway, this is the fourth edition, and I'm going to go through chapter one here in this video. And this is going to be kind of a long video, because chapter one, because it's an introduction to the subject, which is deductive logic, which is the what this particular book focuses on. Deductive, formal logics, specifically sentential and predicate logic it goes over. But the first chapter, there's a lot of history and background and definitions and stuff that the author needs to get through and motivations for why we do things the way that we do things. So just bear with me. This, like I said, this might be kind of a longish video, but I believe it's really worth it. Like I said, I'm starting to really appreciate how good this book is just from chapter one. So let's go through it. Let me stop jabbering and get to the real stuff. So here's my notes. Okay, so the author starts with some background. He says, I don't know why this is changing size. The author says that the book is on deductive logic, like I mentioned before. More specifically, it's a book in symbolic deductive logic. Historically, two overlapping concerns have driven research in deductive logic and the development of specific formal systems of deductive logic. Right, and these are the two bullet points. One, the desire to formulate canons or principles of good reasoning in everyday life, as well as in science and mathematics, which is mainly the area, I probably don't have to tell you, mainly the area that I'm interested in. And two, the desire to formalize and systematize existing and emerging work in mathematics and science. Common to these concerns is the view that what distinguishes good reasoning from bad reasoning, and what makes good deductive reasoning quote unquote logical as opposed to quote unquote illogical is truth preservation. Most of the deductive systems of reasoning that have been developed for geometry, mathematics, and selected areas of science have been axiomatic systems. And if you've been following the channel, you've seen some examples of those because when we went through Tau and parts of Spivak, we developed the number systems through an axiomatic system starting from the piano axioms. Um, So the author here says axiomatic systems start with a relatively small number of basic principles, referred to variously as axioms, definitions, postulates, and assumptions, and provide a way of deducing or deriving from them the rest of the claims or assertions of the discipline being axiomatized. And the reason that that's important is because since successful axiomatic systems use only rules of reasoning that are truth preserving, that never take one form, that never take one from truths to a falsehood, the advantage of successfully axiomatizing a body of knowledge is that it makes all the claims of that body of knowledge as certain as are the starting principles and the rules of reasoning used. And as the channel goes on, we'll have opportunities to see more and more examples of axiomatic systems. Um, we've already seen, like I said, the construction of the number systems axiomatically. We've seen constructions of vector spaces in Agsler's book, but we'll also see, some more structures, topological structures, rings, fields, groups, and so on. As the channel goes along, and once we get to more and more subjects. So anyway. Some history here. Predecessors of Aristotle were interested in reasoning well, in offering cogent arguments for their theses and theories, and in identifying flaws and fallacies in their own and others' reasoning. We're going through Plato's works on the channel as well, so that's something that we'll be exploring in detail. But Aristotle was apparently the first person in the Western world to offer at least an outline of a comprehensive system for codifying and evaluating a wide range of arguments and reasoning. The Aristotelian system is variously known as syllogistic, traditional, or Aristotelian logic. Um, and again, we're going to have opportunities to look at classical logical systems in some of the books that we're going through too. Specifically, I think Smith and Copy talk about Aristotelian systems. The Logic book kind of skips over that stuff, I believe. But anyway, let's continue. So the form or schema, all A's are B's, some C's are A's. And then the conclusion, some C's are B's, produces truth-preserving reasoning whenever A, B, and C are uniformly replaced by general terms. And then we have some examples of that structure with, the variables replaced by general terms. All mammals are vertebrates. Some sea creatures are mammals. Therefore, some sea creatures are vertebrates. And then another one. All cardiologists are wealthy individuals. Some doctors are cardiologists. Therefore, some doctors are wealthy individuals. All right, there's some examples of that arguments with that form. Aristotelian logic is a variety of deductive symbolic logic. It's symbolic because it analyzes reasoning by identifying the form or structure of good reasoning, independent of the specific content of particular instances. We've already talked about this in some of the other books that we looked at so far on logic. Logic is about the structure, not necessarily about the meaning. Right? So it is deductive because the requirement it lays down for good reasoning is full truth preservation. Argument forms for which true premises cannot lead to a false conclusion are said to be valid. Again, this is an idea that we've explored in some of the other videos already. The following is an example of an invalid syllogistic form. Some A's are B's, all C's are A's, therefore all C's are B's. And we have some examples with some instantiations here. Here are two syllogisms with the above form, one with true premises and a true conclusion, and one with true premises and a false conclusion. So the first one is some birds are hawks, all osprey are birds, therefore all osprey are hawks. And the second one, some positive numbers are even numbers. All numbers greater than zero are positive numbers. All numbers greater than zero are even numbers, which is obviously a false conclusion. All right, as powerful as Aristotelian logic is, there are important drawbacks. So this is what I mean about this book. It's so thorough and gives you a lot of background to all the stuff that led up and to the ideas and so on, which some of the other books, although copy is great too, some of the other books are a bit more terse and don't give you so much background. But I really enjoyed this chapter. So anyway, syllogisms are at the heart of Aristotelian logic. Each syllogism must have exactly two premises and a conclusion. Every sentence of a syllogism must be of one of the four following forms. All A's are B's, no A's are B's, some A's are B's, some A's are not B's. Aristotelian logic is thus best suited to reasoning about relations among groups. Aristotelian logic thus strains to handle reasoning about individuals, which is where sentential logic comes in. Reasoning that relies on relations, see chapter 7, cannot readily be accommodated with Aristotelian logic. For example, the reasoning Sarah is taller than Tom and Tom is taller than Betty, therefore Sarah is taller than Betty, presupposes the transitivity of the taller than relation. These shortcomings led logicians in the mid to late 1800s to look for alternatives. For example, sentential logic, which is actually what we'll start with in chapter 2 of the Logic book, as well as in a later chapter in Smith. Actually, I would say section 1 of Smith is on the preliminary stuff about arguments, and then I forget what chapter number it is. Actually, I have Smith right next to me. Let me see if I can look it up. Um, it starts in chapter 2 in chapter 8 with predicate logic, which is the same thing as sentential logic. Um, anyway, let me read out what sentential logic is here, which are so these are systems based on the way sentences of natural language can be generated from other sentences by the use of such expressions as or, and, if then, and not. Sorry, my beard's in my mouth. For example, Karen is either in Paris or in Nairobi. She's not in Nairobi, so Karen is in Paris. Sentential logic cannot easily deal with reasoning that rests on claims about all, some, or none of this sort of thing being of that sort. This sort of claim, the sort of claims that Aristotelian logic can often handle. But there is a formulation of logic that can handle both, which is called predicate logic. And all the books that we have here will look at predicate logic eventually. So predicate logic incorporates sentential logic and is also able to handle all the kinds of sentences that are expressible in Aristotelian logic, as well as many of those that pose difficulties for Aristotelian logic. Okay, why study logic? So the author gives a bunch of reasons to do that. It's a well-developed discipline that many find interesting in its own right. It has a rich history. Speaking about history, I picked up a book on the history of logic, which I plan to get through at some point on the channel. Just, you know how I am. I like to learn a little bit of the history of stuff that I'm studying. Anyway, it has a rich history and current research programs and practical applications. Anyone who plans to major or do graduate work in philosophy, mathematics, computer science, or linguistics should have a solid grounding in symbolic logic. The study of formal logic helps develop the skills needed to present and evaluate arguments in any discipline. In learning to symbolize natural language sentences in a formal language, students become more aware and appreciative of the importance of the structure and complexities of natural language. Language is something that I've sort of recently been getting interested in learning about. So that's some aspect of the channel will deal with the philosophy of language at some point going forward in the future. Not right now, obviously, because I have so much on my plate right now, but that's one of the goals, as well as the philosophy of mathematics. Mastering the formal techniques is a way of coming to understand the principles underlying reasoning and the relations among sentences and sets of sentences. It will help not only to identify good and bad arguments, but also understand why an argument is good or bad. And then finally, mastering the abstract concepts of logic and the relations among them is an exercise in abstract thinking. You know, my branch of study is mathematics, which of course deals with abstract thinking, so logic is useful for that. Okay, sentences, truth values, and arguments. So true, again, a lot of the topics here we've already talked about in Copy and in Smith, but there's going to be a lot of overlap because all the books that I'm going through here are on the same topics, but told through the lens of different authors. So true or false are properties of sentences. Many philosophical disputes arise about such basic concepts as sentences, meaning, context, and truth. For example, some philosophers argue that propositions are the kinds of entities that are really true or false, propositions being taken to be the meaning of sentences and to exist independently of any particular language. This is, for example, the take that Copy makes on sentences versus propositions. Other philosophers eschew propositions as unnecessary metaphysical baggage. Because we have to adopt some terminology, and because all philosophers agree that sentences play some role in language, we shall talk of sentences as being true or false. But we consider such talk to be shorthand for talk of sentences that have certain meanings as used in particular contexts. Throughout this text, we will use the notion of a truth value. True sentences will have truth value T, and false sentences will have truth value F. Not all sentences have truth values. We've seen this before. For example, questions, requests, commands, exclamations, etc. The formal systems we develop in this text are intended to deal only with sentences that are either true or false, as asserted on a particular occasion in a particular context. So, we're not going to be looking at fuzzy logics or modal logics or anything like that. It's just purely deductive logic. Okay, here's a note. Although we will be dealing with sentences which are either true or false, this does not mean we know which truth value any particular sentence has, just that it is one or the other. All right, and then we have a definition here. If you have an argument presented in the form premise one, premise two, and then conclusion, those arguments are said to be in standard form. Now, clearly, in natural language, arguments are rarely presented in standard form, nor are premises always stated before the conclusion. And again, we've seen some examples of that. The first step in analyzing an argument is to extract it from the discourse within which it is embedded and present it in standard form. So this is a skill that we're going to have to develop as we go along. It's frequently the case that a passage containing an argument will contain information that is not relevant to its conclusion. In natural language, the presence of an argument is often signaled by, but not exclusively, by the use of premise and or conclusion indicator words. And again, we've seen these before, so I'll just sort of skip over this. You can pause your screen if you want to see them, but we've talked about indicator words before. Okay. Not every piece of discourse is intended as an argument. So let's define what we mean by an argument. An argument is a set of two or more sentences, one of which is designated as the conclusion and the others as premises. So in other words, some set of the sentences or the propositions are used as support for the conclusion, which is another proposition. The above definition is very broad. It has the advantage of sidestepping the problem of having to account for how plausible a line of reasoning must be to count as an argument, or of how likely it is that a given group of sentences will be taken to support a designated sentence in order for those sentences together to count as an argument. So again, we're abstracting here, right? We're not as concerned with the meaning or how well the premises, sort of connect to the conclusion. We're just interested in the formal structure or the abstract structure. Okay, it's not the job of the logician to set limits on what counts as an argument, but rather to provide means of distinguishing good arguments from bad. And that involves the notions of validity and soundness, which we'll get to in a bit. Sometimes an argument turns out to be a good argument, even when the premises do not appear on first review to support the conclusion. And this, he says, this is another reason for not for not appealing to some level of apparent support in the definition of an argument. So the abstract definition that we have here, this is one reason why we have it that way. All right, so here's an argument. Everyone loves a lover. Tom loves Alice. Everyone loves everyone. If we interpret lover to mean someone who loves someone, then the argument above turns out to be valid, though the fact that the conclusion following from the premises is not obvious. I think copy would call something like this an enthymeme, because there's sort of like some suppressed premises in that argument. The missing reasoning is this. If Tom loves Alice, then Tom is a lover. Everyone loves a lover, therefore everyone loves Tom. Since everyone loves Tom and everyone who loves someone is a lover, therefore everyone is a lover. Everyone is a lover, everyone loves a lover, therefore everyone loves everyone. Of course, this reasoning doesn't work if loves is not being used in the same way in all occurrences of the original argument, and it may not be. For example, everyone loves a lover may be being used, for example, in the sense of everyone is fond of a person who is in love. So if that's the case, then the idea of validity may not, really follow there. But anyway, 1.3 exercises. Oh, let me skip this because I want to just talk about the chapter summary here. I'll have to make another video about the exercises. Okay, deductive validity and soundness. A deductively valid argument is one whose form or structure is fully truth preserving. And then there's a note here. There are good arguments that are not valid deductive arguments. And then Bergmann says, see section 1.5. We've seen some examples of arguments that are good, but that are not deductive. For example, we have inductive reasoning. We also have adductive reasoning, which we'll look at later on. A deductively invalid argument is one whose form or structure is such that instances of it do on occasion proceed from true premises to a false conclusion. For example, the following is a deductively valid argument. There are three and only three people in the room: Juarez, Sloan, and Wang. Juarez is left-handed, Sloan is left-handed, Wang is left-handed. Therefore, all the people in the room are left-handed. The above argument is truth-preserving, right? Meaning that you can't have all true premises and a false conclusion. An argument is deductively, sorry, that's the definition of deductively valid, but this argument it is valid. You can't get from true premises to a false conclusion. An argument is, he defines it right here. So an argument is deductively valid if and only if it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. An argument is deductively invalid if and only if it is not deductively valid. Right. So here's a deductively invalid argument. So consider this argument here. Sloan is left-handed, Wang is left-handed, therefore everyone is left-handed. Right. This is deductively invalid because it's possible for the premises to be true, but the conclusion false, which actually it is in the case in the real world. Although I'm sure there's somebody named Sloan that's left-handed and somebody named Wang that's left-handed. So that anyway, here's a note. If we are only given that an argument is deductively valid, we cannot conclude that the premises or the conclusion is true. So here's an example. The corner grocery store was burglarized, and whoever did it both knew the combination to the safe and was in town the night of the burglary. Carolyn, Albert, and Barbara are the only ones who knew the combination to the safe. Albert and Barbara were out of town the night of the burglary. Carolyn committed the burglary. Right. The above argument is deductively valid, but it does not follow that the premises are true, and hence it does not follow that the conclusion is true. If we have good reason to doubt the conclusion, we have good reason to believe that at least one of the premises is false. One who accepts the premises of a deductively valid argument ought, on pain of irrationality, also accept the conclusion. Correspondingly, one who denies the conclusion of a deductively valid argument ought, again, on pain of irrationality, reject at least one of the premises of the argument. All right. A deductively valid argument cannot have all true premises and a false conclusion, but all other combinations are possible. We've seen examples like this, and Bergmann and company give more examples of that. So maybe I'll skip these just because we've seen a bunch of these already. An argument is deductively sound if and only if it is deductively valid and its premises are true. An argument is deductively unsound if and only if it is not deductively sound. So the idea or the definition of a deductively sound argument involves the already incorporates the idea of deductive validity in the definition itself, but it also means that the premises are true. All right, the previous argument is both deductively valid and deductively sound. I skipped over it, but you can, scroll back if you want to see. Uh, Here's another example. France and Great Britain were the major powers in the Napoleonic Wars. France had the largest army. Great Britain had the largest navy. The power with the largest army won in the end. Therefore, France won in the end. The above argument is deductively unsound since premise 3 is false. The conclusion also is false. All right, here's another example. Chicago is the capital of the United States. The capital of the United States is in Illinois. Therefore, Chicago is in Illinois. Notice the two premises here are false, but the conclusion is true. This argument, therefore, is also deductively unsound, even though the conclusion is true. This illustrates that good reasoning can move from one or more false premises to a true conclusion. A deductively invalid argument may have any combination of truths and falsehoods as premises and conclusions. Again, we've seen examples like that, and the authors here are giving more examples. Maybe I'll scroll through this just to save some time, but you can pause your screen if you want to see them. All right, I'll just scroll through these examples really quick. All right. The only time we can determine whether an argument is deductively valid, given only the truth values of the premises and conclusion, is when the premises are all true and the conclusion false. We know this would be a deductively invalid argument because that's not possible for a deductively valid argument, right? In all other cases, we have to consider whether it's possible for the premises all to be true and the conclusion false, not what is actually true in the real world. All right, so for example, no sea creatures are mammals. Dolphins are sea creatures. Dolphins are not mammals. The above is deductively valid because it's impossible for the premises all to be true and the conclusion false. Even though obviously the conclusion here is false, but that's because one of the premises is false. All right, here we have some more exercises. I'll skip over that in this video. All right, next we get to inductive arguments, which is another way of good reasoning, but that is not deductively valid. So there are good arguments that are not deductively valid, and he has an example here of an inductive argument. Juarez, Sloan, and Wang are all left-handed. Juarez and Sloan both have trouble using can openers made for right-handed people. Therefore, Wang also has trouble using can openers made for right-handed people. This argument is not deductively valid, but the conclusion is to some extent probable given the premises. So here we have definition. An argument has inductive strength to the extent that the conclusion is probable given the premises. Inductive strength is a matter of degree. Inductive reasoning is extremely common both in science and in everyday life. We do this all the time, right? We infer things inductively, based on our experience, right? All right, here's another example. Individuals stricken with yellow fever have recent mosquito bites. Individuals not stricken with yellow fever tend to work in areas not infested with mosquitoes. Most individuals bitten by mosquitoes that have recently bitten yellow fever patients soon contract yellow fever. Therefore, mosquitoes transmit yellow fever. Right? This argument is inductively strong, but deductively invalid. Right? It's deductively invalid because it's possible for the premises to be true, but the conclusion false. Possible doesn't mean that that's actually true in the real world, right? Um, Deductive and inductive logic both provide methods for deductive and inductive logic both provide methods for evaluating arguments, and methods of both sorts can be applied to the same argument. Which methods are most appropriate depends on the context. If an argument is given with the assumption that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be also be true, then the argument should be evaluated using the standards of deductive logic. Whereas if an argument is given with the weaker assumption that if the premises are true, the conclusion is probable, then the argument should be evaluated by the standards of inductive logic. We're going to do a full study of inductive logic as well as deductive logic. It's just that the inductive logic stuff is not going to take place in the logic book specifically because it's about deductive logic, the book. Okay, logical consistency, truth, falsity, and equivalence. One of the most important relations that can hold among a set of sentences is consistency. A set of sentences is logically consistent if and only if it is possible for all the members of that set to be true. A set of sentences is logically inconsistent if and only if it is not logically consistent. Right, and then we have an example here. The following set is logically consistent. Texas is larger than Oklahoma. The phlogiston theory of heat has been disproven. The United States Congress consists of the Senate and the House of Representatives. There's an asterisk here, and that's because Bergmann has a footnote relating to that example. Technically, what should be listed between the curly braces are the names of the members of the set. Here, the names of sentences. These are formed by placing single quotation marks around the sentences, and he says to see section 2.4. Right. Note that there's no requirement that the members of the set have quote unquote something to do with each other. Here's another example. Texas is larger than Oklahoma. The phlogiston theory of heat has been proven. The United States Congress consists of the Senate and the House of Representatives. And then the author says, someone who believes all the members of this new set has at least one false belief, but this does not make the set inconsistent. Nothing in the nature of the three sentences and their relationship to one another keeps all from being true at the same time. Right? And then we have an example of an inconsistent set of sentences, and you'll see the difference here, hopefully. So the following set of sentences is inconsistent. Michael and Benjamin both applied for positions at the local fast food outlet, and at least one of them will be hired. No one who applied for the position will get it. So hopefully you can see why this set of sentences is inconsistent. It can't possibly be the case that both are true at the same time, right? Because that would be contradictory. The relationships between the members of the set make it impossible for all its members to be true. We don't need to know Michael or Benjamin to know this. So here's another example. The following set is also inconsistent. Anyone who takes astrology seriously is foolish. Alice is my sister, and no sister of mine has a husband who is foolish. Horace is Alice's husband, and he reads the horoscope column every morning. Anyone who reads the horoscope column every morning takes astrology seriously. Right, so that's inconsistent, right? Because the sentences are contradictory if they can't all be true at the same time. Logic cannot normally tell us whether a given sentence is true or false, but we can use logic to discover whether a set is consistent or inconsistent. If a set is inconsistent, we know that at least one member is false, and hence that believing all the members of the set would involve believing at least one false sentence, something which we don't want to do. Establishing that a set is consistent does not establish that all or even any of its members are true, but it does establish that it is possible for all the members to be true. Although logic cannot normally be used to determine whether a particular sentence is true or false, there are two special cases. So here's some special cases. Some sentences are true because of their form or structure, and here are some examples. Either Cynthia will get a job or she will not get a job. Right? That's true no matter what happens. If Henry gets fired, he gets fired. Again, that's true no matter what. If everyone passes, Denise will pass. If Sarah will go mountain climbing, sorry, if Sarah will go mountain climbing, if and only if Marjorie does, then if Marjorie does not go, neither will Sarah. Sentences like these do not give us any new information. They're called logically true sentences, which he defines down below. A sentence is logically true if and only if it is not possible for the sentence to be false. And then we have some examples of sentences that are called logically false. So some sentences are false by virtue of their form or structure. So again, here's some examples. Sarah is an A student and Sarah is not an A student. So no matter what happens, right, in that sentence is always false. All lions are ferocious, but there are lions in zoos that are not ferocious. I'm here and nobody is here. Some dollar bills are not dollar bills. All of those sentences are examples that are always false, no matter what. These sentences also give us no information about the world. And then he says here in a note, but logically true sentences are useful in ways that logically false sentences are not. By some accounts, mathematics consists exclusively of logical truths. And then here we just have the formal definition of a logically false sentence. A sentence is logically false if and only if it is not possible for the sentence to be true. Some sentences purport to give us information about the world. Such sentences claim that the world or some part of it is a certain way, and to determine whether they are true, we have to gather information about the world and not merely about how those sentences are constructed. And a sentence that's like that is called logically indeterminate. So a sentence is logically indeterminate if and only if it is not logically true nor logically false. And then we have some examples of logically indeterminate sentences here. Ivan is driving from Boston to New Orleans. Anyone who takes astrology seriously is foolish. Perkins advocates the relaxation of air pollution standards because he owns a lot of stock in a company producing coal with a high sulfur content. So these are sentences that are possible to be true or possible to be false, depending on what the case actually is. All right. I had to extend this to another set of lecture notes here because, like I said, the chapter's kind of long. So here I'm just continuing chapter one. Sentences are sometimes related in a way that, because of their structure or form, if one is true, the other is as well, and vice versa. And we call those types of sentences logically equivalent. We'll get to the definition in a second. First, let's look at an example. All right, so all of these pairs of sentences are examples of logically equivalent sentences. Henry loves Sarah. Sarah is loved by Henry. Both Sarah and Henry will pass. Both Henry and Sarah will pass. Not all tumors are cancerous. Some tumors are not cancerous. The members of the following pair are not logically equivalent. Henry loves Sarah and Sarah loves Henry. So those two are not equivalent. Right. So here's the definition. The members of a pair of sentences are logically equivalent if and only if it's not possible for one of the sentences to be true while the other sentence false. Okay. Note that we allow a sentence to be equivalent to itself by counting them as a pair of identical sentences. On this definition, all logically true sentences are logically equivalent, and all logically false sentences are logically equivalent. Not all logically indeterminate sentences, however, are logically equivalent, and we have some. Does he have examples? I guess not. The test for logical equivalence is not sameness of truth value, but whether the sentences in question must have the same truth value, whether it's impossible, in other words, whether it's impossible for them to have different truth values. All right, and then we have some special cases of validity here. We're now in a position to consider some special and rather counterintuitive cases of validity. All right, so remember the definition of validity is that you can't have all true premises and a false conclusion. That's what it means for a set of sentences to be logically valid. Or an argument, sorry, I should say an argument because there's structure to an argument. Right. So here's, look at this example here. Consider an argument whose conclusion is logically true. The Philadelphia Phillies are the best team in the National League. And then the conclusion, either the next president will be a woman or the next president will not be a woman. So this obviously, the conclusion here obviously is logically true. right? Arguments whose conclusions are logically true are deductively valid, whether or not their conclusions are related to their premises. This is because it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, right? Because there's no case where the conclusion is false. Put another way, this argument is truth preserving. And just a note here, since the conclusion is logically true, it requires no support. Hence, whatever support the premises provide, even if none at all, is enough. Here's another example. Consider an argument whose premises form a logically inconsistent set. So Albert is brighter than all of his sisters. Albert and Sally are brother and sister. Sally is brighter than all her brothers. Therefore, Tyrannosaurus Rex was the fiercest of all dinosaurs. Notice that the set of premises is an inconsistent set, right? They can't all be true at the same time. Therefore, you can't have all true premises and a false conclusion because not all of the premises can be true at the same time. This argument satisfies the definition of deductive validity because the premises cannot all be true. I just said that. This argument is truth preserving because it will never take us from truth to a falsehood. Arguments whose premises are inconsistent while valid are, of course, never sound, right? Because soundness not only means that the argument is valid, but it also means that all the premises are true. All right, here's an example. Sandra will get an A in the course, and Sandra will not get an A in the course. Therefore, Sandra will graduate. Here, notice that the premise is logically false. Since the premise is logically false, it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, so it's deductively valid. It satisfies the definition. Such arguments are valid because I just said this, but they meet the requirement of truth preservation. They will never take us from truth to a falsehood, not because the premises support the conclusion in any intuitive way. So again, we're sort of like abstracting, right? So we're not really thinking about meaning. We're thinking about truth preservation, right? Arguments such as these are sometimes dismissed as not being arguments at all, precisely because their validity does not depend on a relation between the premises and conclusion. There are, however, systematic reasons for allowing these cases to constitute arguments and thus for recognizing them as valid deductive arguments because we want a complete theory, right? Okay, and that's the end of chapter 1 for the logic book. Let me stop my screen share for a second. So, sorry for the length of that this video, but that, like I said, chapter 1 was long, but there's a lot of important stuff, prerequisite stuff in there. So chapter 2 starts on sentential logic in the logic book. But before I get to chapter 2 here, I want to actually finish the chapters in Smith up to chapter 8, where he starts on predicate logic. So I can do Smith and the same topics in Smith and in Bergmann at the same time. So I'm going to make a video after this one on Smith's chapter 2. And like I said, I'll work through chapters 1 through 8 in Smith before I get back to Bergmann. So I'll end the video here. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Like I said, I really am enjoying the logic book as well as the other books that I've been reading. Both Smith, the logic book by Bergmann, and Copy's book as well. I'm really enjoying the read and sort of steeping myself in the subject of logic. Just one other thing here. I do kind of want to make a video also on Smith's Beginning Mathematical Logic, a study guide, following his recommendations in here as we go through his book on formal logic. So that might be a video that's coming out soon too, so keep an eye out for that. But anyway, this has already gone on way too long, so let me stop here. And like I said, give me a like and subscribe down below if you enjoy the content, and let me know what you think down below. I'll see you guys in the next video.